Hello everybody and welcome back to Newegg TV. My name is Steve and today I'm going to do a quick overview with some benchmarks of this SSD from ADATA. This is the XPG SX900 model, specifically the 512GB capacity version. So we're going to start with some of the stuff that comes inside the box. First and foremost, we have a quick installation guide or a quick start guide here that's going to help you install that SSD. Then they're also providing for you some free software for the disk migration utility, which is actually Acronis based. There's a little link that's here at the bottom. Actually, you know what? I'll put the link in the description below because there's information on how to actually install it too, should you need to, or in order to install the software from your hard drive currently and migrate it over to this new one. Now we have the 2.5-inch to 3.5-inch tray that ADATA has provided. It's black and plastic, also the hardware screws that you're going to need in order to install this particular SSD. So this drive, as you can see, it's a 7mm drive actually, 7mm Z-height drive. It is a black metallic housing, providing the ADATA logo here on the front, letting you know which capacity that you do have. There are several other capacities, a total of 4. We have the 64GB, 128GB, 256, and of course the 512GB version in front of me now. And I'll flip that around to the back to show you a little bit more information that's actually stored on the drive itself or labeled on the drive itself. Down here at the bottom is probably the most important thing that's going to be useful to you at home when you get this, and that is because it provides for you a key for Acronis ATI HD 2013, and that's the software for that link that I just mentioned earlier. You can download that and migrate some of your files over and or image it if you actually happen to use less than 512GB on your primary Windows drive. So keep that in mind if you decide to use that. Otherwise, a fresh install is probably a better way to go. Here is the Sata interface. To be more specific, the Sata Rev 3 6GB per second interface. Of course, we have the power SATA connector here, and here is the data connector. Pretty standard for a drive, but I did want to mention that it also has a 3-year warranty. The drive itself actually has native command queuing. Of course, it has smart command support as well. But let's go ahead and open it up so I can show you what it looks like on the inside. Okay, so I've opened up the SSD and wanted to show you guys the PCB inside with all the NAND packages and the controller. But obviously you're not going to want to do this unless you want to avoid that 3-year warranty, or it's 3 years from now and you're curious, I suppose. But anyways, the point is I'm doing it so that you don't need to quench your curiosity at the cost of a warranty. That being said, you can see on one side of the PCB here 8 of the NAND packages, and if I flip that around you can see another 8 on the opposite side. Of course, that's all connected into this SandForce controller. And if you've done your research, you already know that this is a 2281 controller from LSI. So that being said, I'll get more specific and tell you it's the SF2281 VB2 SPC. Now this of course includes optimized firmware that increases the capacity 7% as compared to prior SandForce controller-based drives. But there's also some other things that SandForce controllers will do for you, and that's to help you a little bit with some of the benchmarks. In this particular case, more like compression, because it does have on-the-fly compression for compressible data. So if you're using data like that, it's going to speed up your writes. So without further ado, let's jump into some benchmarks. All right, for our test bench, we have it set up with a Core i7 4770K Haswell processor that is hooked up to a Z87 motherboard from Asus, the Maximus 6 formula board. That's utilizing the native a 6GB per second SATA Rev 3 connection, and that is going into this ADATA SX900 512GB SSD with the firmware of 5.0.7a. Now, let's take a look at our first benchmark, which is ADO. And right now I'm using it at Q depth 4, and the maximum it looks like it reaches all the way up to 534 megabytes per second on the write, and we're looking at 559 megabytes per second on the reads. Jump up from there to Q depth 10, and we see a difference of, it looks like it got down to 532 megabytes per second on the write, and then a maximum, once again, of 559 megabytes per second on the reads. And now on to Crystal Disk Mark, and we're looking at sequential reads of 507 megabytes per second, sequential writes of 320 megabytes per second. Drop down to the bottom and we see 4K QDEP32 reads of 224 megabytes per second and writes of 95 megabytes per second. All the way down here at the bottom, we can transfer that into IOPS. We're looking at 54,000 IOPS on the random read and 23,000 IOPS on the write. Now, if I move forward to the next stage of Crystal Disk Mark, we can see I'm actually using zero fill, which means this is compressible data. And because it is a SandForce controller, we're going to see a little bit more performance on this because it actually can compress for writes. So reads, once again, we're at 506 megabytes per second on the writes. We're now up to 501 megabytes per second on the sequential writes. The 4K QDEP32, we're looking at 225 megabytes per second on the read and 200 megabytes per second on the write. And of course, the IOPS have now jumped up quite a bit. We're looking at 54,000 IOPS on the read and 48,000, almost 50,000 even on the write, on the writes for a queue depth of 32 4 kilobytes. Now, this is where ADATA has been saying that it's going to reach a maximum 4K writes of up to 30,000 IOPS. And so clearly it's doing a little bit better here in the zero fill and the compressible versus the incompressible. Not quite getting the writes on the incompressible at 23,000 versus the 49 almost thousand on the writes in terms of compressible. So keep that in mind. That's probably where they're going with something like an average between the two of them. Now moving forward towards SSD, this particular benchmark, this is where ADATA says that it's going to reach up to 480 megabytes per second on the reads and 260 megabytes per second on the writes. So we can see on the reads here we are reaching 484 megabytes per second. So it is definitely hitting that marker. And then on the writes, it's 239 megabytes per second, which is a little shy on the writes. It should be 260, but my bet is that the compressible is probably where they're looking to make up their difference there, compressible data. Then of course we have the ISO program and game synthetic benchmarks for SSD. You can see the numbers here. And jumping forward, here's where we actually start to see the compression benchmark, where it sort of starts low on the reads here, but it kind of flattens out at a plateau of, let's see, it starts at what it looks like around 390 megabytes per second, jumps up to about 490, and then pretty much stays that way across the board, all the way up to 100% compression versus 0% compressible data. And then starting here on the writes, we can see it starts at about 120 megabytes per second, leaps up to 267, and then slowly just climbs as it reaches fully 100% compressible data, ending off at about 390 megabytes per second on compressible data. So you can see that SandForce controller really jumping in there to save those performance numbers. Now looking here, we can see we have Black Magic Designs disk speed test. This is the writes, of course, and the reads. I'm getting 308 megabytes per second on the writes, and the reads of 487 megabytes per second. Sort of gives us a series of check boxes here, letting us know where this drive would be applicable in certain color schemes and certain resolutions. So keep that in mind. This is going to be okay for what you see here. Anything with the gray boxes, that is not going to be acceptable performance. Okay, everybody, that's going to wrap up this overview of ADATA's XPG SX900 512 gigabyte SSD overview and benchmarks. Don't forget, if you like this video, to click the like button, and if you haven't already done so, click subscribe to any of our various YouTube channels. And until then, we'll see you guys very soon.